Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the PlayStation VR 1 and see how this particular VR headset holds up in 2024. Now, this I would say is a very interesting type of headset because in the last couple of years, we have seen these VR AR type of headsets take up all over the world. They are very, very popular. And I will tell you at the end of the day, if I were to go ahead and kind of pick up any sort of device, it's definitely going to be, if it's a VR, headset, the PlayStation VR 1 is an interesting one because there's still a lot of stuff going on with this. But would it be the first one I'd recommend to people? I guess we'll wait and see. If you want to pick up some VR headsets I would recommend buying this year though, links will be down in the description. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the same time. Now, starting off with the outside of this particular headset, or maybe let's start off with the idea of this one. So when this particular VR headset was starting to kind of be made by Sony, they wanted to go ahead and make this type of, VR headset. I'm going to say that over and over again, VR headset, but they wanted to make this headset essentially kind of like a league of its own. They wanted to go and kind of, have it team up with the PlayStation 4 at the time, and they wanted to go ahead and kind of give you this type of experience which would be beyond what you'd expect from a normal game. Now, at this time when this particular headset came out, it was released in 2016. So the thing with this particular console you have to remember is that Sony did not make this its own machine. They didn't make this its own thing where you can just buy it and just use it on itself. You have to connect this thing to a PlayStation 4. So the barrier of entry for this particular console or this particular headset is already a little bit more tough because you will actually have to go through and essentially have this thing on your head and connect it to your actual PlayStation. So it's not like a Apple Vision Pro or a Meta Quest Pro or anything like that where you can use those things on their own. You have to use these particular headsets via, connecting it to the actual console. So this is in and of itself kind of could be an annoying thing for some people. And if I were to go and kind of buy a VR headset, it'd be kind of tough to consider this thing because you kind of have to connect it to an actual PlayStation 4. So this in and of itself can kind of be a little bit of an annoying thing for some people. Now, when I look at this particular device, I will say the design of this, particular headset looks very, very good. Like it does not look like an ugly thing. It definitely looks a little bit outdated, especially when you consider this thing, when you look at it compared to something like the PlayStation VR 2. But this thing, I would say it doesn't feel terrible. It is primarily built out of plastic. Now, when I'm feeling something like, let's say a Meta Quest 2 or a Meta Quest 3, and I'm feeling something like the PlayStation VR 1, there is a pretty stark difference about how good of a feeling machine the PlayStation, VR 1 isn't and how good of a feeling machine for the most part the Quest 2 is. I mean, both of them are built out of plastic, but I do feel like in a lot of ways the VR 1 headset, I can go ahead and kind of break this thing with one squeeze if I really wanted to. And I do feel like the parts of this particular headset I can kind of break apart. Like if I was going through and if I just kind of took this off my head and dropped it, I feel like it would kind of break. So keep that in mind. You can probably buy a case for this thing, but at that time, that was one thing that did kind of annoy me a little bit with this particular headset at that time. Now, on top of that though, I would say definitely not the biggest deal in the world. It's still totally okay. And there's still lots of cheaper feeling devices that have, came out since this thing. Now, beyond that though, with its design, still looks pretty good. Again, there's not really that much to complain about here. On the front little panel, you do have that little glowing PlayStation logo or the glowing screen that you can kind of have. It's not quite a display, but it still looks kind of cool. You have, a little button at the top which will allow you to kind of, change things. You obviously have power options here. On the back side, you have this little area where you can go ahead and essentially kind of, make this thing bigger or smaller on your particular head. So let's say this is a very, very big device on your head. Well, you can go and make it slimmer and vice versa. You can really do a lot of different things there too, which is another really cool thing going on for this particular device, which is something I actually like a lot. I will say though, the feeling in the hand is the one thing that's very interesting. Although you're not going to be using this thing and feeling it around every single day, it can be kind of an annoying thing, and that in and of itself could be something that could turn off a lot of people, especially if you're comparing this thing against the PlayStation VR 2 headset, which I think is significantly better. Now, on top of that, this particular device, this is the interesting thing. Again, you have to have a PlayStation 4 in order to use this thing. So you cannot go ahead and buy the PlayStation VR 1 and then go ahead and actually use it by itself. You will have to configure and connect this thing to the PlayStation 4 at the time. But I will tell you, the amount of wires that are needed on this particular thing and the setup that is required for the PlayStation VR 1 is actually kind of crazy. So if you're looking at the PlayStation VR 1, right, or let's say you're looking at the PlayStation 4, it's a good minimalistic, kind of machine. You really only need a couple of wires for the PlayStation 4 to actually work. The PlayStation VR 1, this is a completely different story. There is so many different wires, ports, and all these things that you have to kind of set up in order to actually use your VR 1 headset. Now you can get by without having to, use your headphones and wireless stuff and all that stuff. But for the most part, you actually do need to have this thing, kind of set up properly. And you do need a ton of ports and tons of wires that are running around for this thing. Because the VR headset is not wireless, it will always have to be connected to a PlayStation 4. Now, there might be some mods around that can kind of change these things around, but that in and of itself can be, again, another turnoff for you. Now, those are the only negative things I can really think about. Beyond that, though, this is at its core, an extension to the PlayStation. It's an extension to the already existing PlayStation games that you can play. And there are actually lots and lots of different VR games that you can actually play that are supported on the PlayStation VR 1. And the cool thing is, I will tell you for the most part, is that if you are considering a PlayStation VR 1 today, right now, you can buy a PlayStation VR 1 and you can buy a PlayStation 4 for really cheap. These things aren't super expensive. They're not as expensive as they used to be. And I do think this in and of itself is a very, very cool thing going on for these particular devices. Now, the thing you have to remember is that with the PlayStation VR right now, there's a couple hundred games you can play, and that's probably for the PlayStation VR 2. The PSVR 1 has even less games that you can play with it there. So you kind of should look up like PSVR 1, supported games. Those types of things will probably give you a little bit of a better understanding of which games are supported and which games aren't. Again, you can't just go ahead and just put this thing on your head and expect every single game to play. That is also not going to work here. You're pretty much, once again, going to be stuck in a situation where, this thing is not going to be able to play every single game you throw at it. So I do think this in and of itself is another kind of turnoff. Like if you wanted to go ahead, let's say you had your favorite game on your PlayStation, you would have to make sure that thing is supported on the PlayStation VR situation. Because if it's not, well, then you're not going to be able to play it. So this in and of itself probably could be another turnoff for some people as well. It's not the biggest deal in the world, but that can be kind of a thing. I would say my personal biggest gripe I have with the PlayStation VRs in general is that I do have to physically connect it to a PlayStation. I feel like I wish I could just play these things wirelessly. I feel like Sony could find a way to go ahead and have us verify our ownership of a PlayStation or something like that. Or if they wanted to, they could just go ahead and make a completely different VR system, which would require us to not even own a PlayStation. And I think they could make a ton of money in the VR space if they went down that direction. This thing is not comparable, I would say, to a Meta Quest or to an Apple Vision headset or to any other type of streaming device out there, or to any type of VR device. They're just completely different worlds, which I think is okay. They can have different things and bring different things to the table. But I will tell you, when I look at something like the PlayStation VR 1, I just don't see why I would recommend anyone to buy this. I mean, it's already an outdated device. You already have the successor of this particular VR headset too. And I do think the successor is a pretty big difference. Like if I'm going from the VR 1 to the VR 2, those are some pretty stark differences for the most part. And I do appreciate the VR 2 a lot more than the PlayStation VR 1. So overall, that's kind of how I look at the PlayStation VR 1 right now. It's still worth buying if you have a PlayStation 4, but if you even plan on upgrading anytime soon, I would probably just recommend going up to the PlayStation VR 1. I would recommend just going up to the PlayStation VR 2 and probably saving yourself some headache. So that pretty much covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. More importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.